In today's video, we talk about the aftermath of the original Star Wars. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back. When Star Wars was released on May 25th, 1977, it changed everything. And I'm sure the vast majority of you that are watching this video already know that. Movie making, toy making, merchandising, comics, television, pop culture in general. Everything was affected by the phenomenon that was Star Wars. Recently, I had a chat with my friend Stu over at the channel Universal Toy Collector, link will be in the description, go check him out, where I was a guest on his show, What Made Star Wars Great, where we talk about our memories of the Star Wars franchise and how it affected us. That got me thinking back to the final years of my childhood, and all the things I loved during that time that were either a direct result of or influenced by the release of Star Wars. So I'm going to talk about them in this video. And in an effort to cut down on the number of you forgots, actuallys, and fun facts that I know you guys like to throw in the comments section, let me be clear about what the scope of this video is. This is not a comprehensive list of everything that was affected by Star Wars. These are specific to things that I enjoyed in my childhood in the wake of the original Star Wars film between 1977 and 1980. That said, let's begin. After the success of the original Star Wars film, science fiction was a hot property in Hollywood, and many projects went into production. Some had similarities to Star Wars, while others were very, very different. Although Disney's science fiction film, The Black Hole, was in development long before Star Wars was released, the popularity of Star Wars certainly had an effect on The Black Hole's merchandising and marketing. Writers Bob Bardash and Richard Landau first approached Disney with a script for The Black Hole in the early 1970s, originally conceived as a disaster film in space. In the wake of the popularity of the disaster genre during that time, with films like The Poseidon Adventure and The Towering Inferno. Originally called Space Station 1, the film went through several revisions on its way to becoming The Black Hole, which was released on December 21st, 1979 in the US. The Black Hole stars Anthony Perkins, Robert Forster, Joseph Bottoms, Yvette Mimieux, and Ernest Borgnine as the crew of the Earth spaceship Palomino. They are accompanied by a robot named Vincent, an acronym that stands for Vital Information Necessary Centralized, voiced by Roddy McDowall. As it is returning to Earth, the Palomino discovers a black hole and a long-lost ship called the USS Cygnus. Aboard the Cygnus, the Palomino crew discover brilliant scientist Dr. Hans Reinhardt, played by Maximilian Schell, and his sinister robot bodyguard, Maximilian. Reinhardt is the only human on board the Cygnus, with the ship being manned by robotic sentries and drones. But things are not what they seem on the USS Cygnus, and most of the crew starts to become suspicious of Reinhardt. When Vincent encounters a battered, earlier model of his type named Bob, voiced by Slim Pickens, Reinhardt's dark secrets are revealed. There were a large number of tie-ins released to coincide with the film. Several comic book adaptations, one actually drawn by comics legend Jack Kirby, a little golden book entitled The Black Hole, A Spaceship Adventure for Robots, a Disney read-along book and record, some free premiums packed in with Nabisco cereals, and an action figure line from Mego, which created a series of O-ring figures, the design of which was modeled after Mego's Micronauts. The Black Hole was released to mixed reviews, with movie critics negatively comparing it to Star Wars due to its slow pace and melodramatic storyline, with some calling the robots in the film a straight steal from Star Wars. Astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson has called The Black Hole the least scientifically accurate movie of all time, saying, quote, They not only got none of the physics right about falling into a black hole, had they gotten it right, it would have been a vastly more interesting movie. Although The Black Hole has become a cult classic, I found it a bit boring when I watched it for the first time. Although I did have the book and record adaptation of it when I was a kid, and I had several figures from the Mego toy line, specifically the robots, Maximilian, Vincent, and the Sentry, who I mixed in with my Star Wars figures to give the Jawas a few extra droids to sell. Battlestar Galactica was created by television producer Glenn A. Larson and made its debut on the ABC television network on September 17, 1978. Starring Lorne Greene, Richard Hatch, and Dirk Benedict, the series follows the remnants of humanity as they flee the destruction of their homeworlds by a race of fearsome robots called Cylons, who are intent on wiping all humans from the galaxy. The last military ship to survive the Cylons' attack is the Battlestar Galactica. That leads, as the title sequence calls it, a ragtag fleet of fugitive ships, as they search for a new home for humanity, a legendary lost colony called Earth, while trying to outrun or evade the Cylons. Battlestar Galactica began as a made-for-television miniseries, which was then edited to make a theatrical released film. ABC ordered a full season of the series, and 24 episodes were produced. But due to high production cost and declining ratings, the network canceled the series after only one season. It was briefly brought back in a sequel series called Galactica 1980, which had a mostly new cast and a much lower production budget. But that series was poorly received and was canceled after only 10 episodes. During its brief time, the original Battlestar Galactica had its share of legal troubles, being sued by both 20th Century Fox and George Lucas for similarities to Star Wars. It did, however, have quite a bit of merchandising attached to it, including a Marvel comic book series and a toy line from Mattel. I had the entire first wave of figures from Mattel, including a mail-in gold leader Cylon, as well as the Cylon Raider ship. The Mattel toys were done in the same scale and style as the Kenner Star Wars figures, and I mostly used the Battlestar Galactica figures to increase my cast of characters in the 2 Cantina playsets that I owned. Unfortunately, the Mattel Battlestar Galactica toy line would be most remembered due to the tragedies that occurred that were associated with those toys. There were 2 different incidents of children swallowing the spring-loaded missiles from the vehicles, with one of the children tragically dying. This led to a recall of the toys, and eventually a change in toy safety standards. Although the original version of Battlestar Galactica did not last long, in 2003, the series was reimagined by Ronald D. Moore. A miniseries debuted in December 2003, followed by a regular series on the Sci-Fi channel. The reimagined Battlestar Galactica was universally praised by fans and critics alike, and remains one of the best science fiction television series of all time. Now, Star Wars and the science fiction horror classic Alien have very little in common besides space. But apparently that's all it took for 20th Century Fox to greenlight the film. The idea that would become Alien was first conceived by writer Dan O'Bannon, who got the idea after working on the science fiction comedy film Dark Star with director John Carpenter. O'Bannon drew inspiration from many works of science fiction and horror. To quote O'Bannon, "I didn't steal Alien from anybody, I stole it from everybody," citing some of his inspirations as films The Thing from Another World, Forbidden Planet, and Planet of the Vampires. The script would eventually find its way to Brandywine, a production company with ties to 20th Century Fox. According to Gordon Carroll, one of the founders of Brandywine, quote, "When Star Wars came out and was the extraordinary hit that it was, suddenly science fiction became the hot genre." O'Bannon recalled that 20th Century Fox wanted to follow through on Star Wars, and they wanted to follow through fast, and the only spaceship script they had sitting on their desk was Alien. Alien, directed by Ridley Scott, was released on May 25th, 1979, starring Tom Skerritt, Sigourney Weaver, Veronica Cartwright, Harry Dean Stanton, John Hurt, Ian Holm, and Yaphet Kotto as the crew of the commercial space tug Nostromo. While returning to Earth, the crew receives orders from their employers, known only as the Company, to investigate transmissions indicating intelligent life on an alien world. It's there that they would encounter one of the most terrifying monsters in movie history, which was so memorably designed by Swiss artist H.R. Giger. Toymaker Kenner had planned a full toy line for Alien, just like they had done with Star Wars. But reportedly, Kenner assumed that Alien would be a PG film, not an R-rated movie. In 1979, an 18-inch tall figure of the film's title creature was released by Kenner. Known to fans as the Big Chap, this toy was responsible for scaring children worldwide. Faced with blowback from releasing a terrifying toy from an R-rated film, Kenner canceled their plans for a full toy line. Although in 1992, Kenner, now a subsidiary of Hasbro, did release a full Alien-based toy line. Those abandoned Kenner designs from 1979 were eventually recreated in modern day by the company Super 7, and the success of those toys led to Super 7's popular, yet many would say overpriced, line of reaction figures. 1979's Alien is now recognized as the greatest sci-fi horror film of all time, and its sequel, Aliens from 1986, directed by James Cameron, is considered one of the greatest sci-fi action films of all time. And the Alien franchise has taken up residence in our pop culture ever since. With 7 more films of varying quality produced in the franchise, a host of toys and merchandise based on the Alien universe, and an upcoming television series, Alien Earth, to debut sometime in 2025. In the frenzy of science fiction that followed Star Wars, not all properties were brand new. Several were rebooted or reworked versions of older classics. The science fiction adventure hero Buck Rogers made his debut on the comics page of American newspapers in 1929, created by Philip Francis Nolan. Buck became internationally known through newspaper comics, comic books, a radio adaptation, and a film serial in 1939 starring Larry Buster Crabbe as the title character. In 1979, producer Glenn A. Larson, who had just worked on Battlestar Galactica for ABC, developed a new version of Buck Rogers for NBC television. Originally conceived as a made-for-TV movie, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century was released theatrically in March of 1979. The film made $21 million at the North American box office, prompting Universal Studios to move ahead with a television series later that year. In Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, Captain William Buck Rogers, played by Gil Gerard, is a lone astronaut on the exploration craft Ranger 3. An accident knocks Ranger 3 off its intended trajectory, and a malfunction in the life support systems freezes Buck in suspended animation. Ranger 3 returns to Earth 500 years later, where Buck awakes to find an Earth that is completely alien to him. Besides Gil Gerard, the series starred Erin Gray as Colonel Wilma Deering of the Earth Defense Forces, Tim O'Connor as scientist Dr. Hewer, and Buck's robotic sidekick Tweaky, performed by Felix Silla, with a voice provided by Looney Tunes legend Mel Blanc. Recurring villains in the first season were the Draconian Empire, represented by the beautiful Princess Ardala, played by Pamela Hensley, and her henchman, Military Commander Kane, first played by Michael Ansara and then by Henry Silva, and her bodyguard, Tiger Man, played by professional wrestler Hard-Boiled Haggerty. The Buck Rogers series, led by the handsome and charming Gil Gerard, was a fun series to watch when I was a kid. It was a series of sometimes campy, sometimes goofy, lighthearted sci-fi adventures. Just like every other sci-fi property back then, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century did get a toy line. Mego produced a series of 1/18th scale action figures. Just like the Black Hole toys, these were O-ring figures that were modeled after Mego's Micronauts. Several spaceships and playsets were also released for the line, although some of those were actually repackaged toys from Mego's previous lines Micronauts and Star Trek. I did not have any of these spaceships or playsets from that line, but I did have all the figures. And usually, due to their scale and type of articulation, I would mix my Buck Rogers figures in with my Micronauts toys. The first season of Buck Rogers lasted 24 episodes, but with Season 2, the series was almost completely overhauled. Buck, Wilma, and Tweaky were transplanted from Earth and made crew members aboard the starship Searcher, on a mission to explore the galaxy and locate lost tribes of humans. Other regular cast members to join the show at that point were Jay Garner as Admiral Ephraim Asimov, who was named after famous science fiction writer Isaac Asimov, Tom Christopher as the alien Birdman Hawk, and Wilfred Hyde-White as the eccentric Dr. Goodfellow. A second robot was added to the crew, the snobbish Crichton, voiced by Jeff David. It seemed like the second season was trying to set up a sort of R2-D2 C3PO relationship between Tweaky and Crichton, but unlike the endearingly fussy C3PO from Star Wars, the snobbish Crichton just came off as a bit of an asshole. The stories of the second season of the show dealt with more serious topics than the first, such as ecology, racism, pollution, and religion. But Buck Rogers failed to hold his ground in the ratings, and after only 13 episodes in the second season, the show was canceled. And although the name Buck Rogers has been bounced around in Hollywood for many years as the subject of a possible revival, no other movies or TV shows featuring that character have been released since the cancellation of the TV series. Flash Gordon, created by Alex Raymond, first appeared in American newspaper comic strips on January 7th, 1934. The strip was inspired by and created to compete with the aforementioned Buck Rogers. And arguably, Flash has seen much greater success in pop culture than his old comic strip rival. He was the star of 3 different movie adventure serials in the 1930s, featuring Buster Crabbe playing the title role. Crabbe would also go on to play Buck Rogers, as we've already mentioned. A Flash Gordon television series ran for 39 episodes from 1954 to 1955, featuring Steve Holland in the title role. As many Star Wars enthusiasts are aware, George Lucas was heavily influenced by Flash Gordon, and he actively sought to make a film of the character in the 1970s. When he couldn't acquire the rights to make Flash Gordon, he went on to create Star Wars. The person that had those film rights at the time was famous Italian producer Dino De Laurentiis, whose impressive career spanned over 50 years and included films like Barbarella and the 1976 remake of King Kong. De Laurentiis had been interested in making a Flash Gordon movie since the 1960s, but it didn't go into production until 1977. Featuring a script by Lorenzo Semple Jr., who had worked on the 1960s Batman television series, and a memorable score by Howard Blake and the rock band Queen, Flash Gordon was released on December 5th, 1980. The role of Flash was given to relatively unknown former football player Sam J. Jones, who beat out both Kurt Russell and Arnold Schwarzenegger for the part. The rest of the cast consisted of Melody Anderson as Dale Arden, Topol as Dr. Hans Zarkov, Timothy Dalton as Prince Baron, Brian Blessed as Prince Vultan, Peter Wingard as General Clytus, Ornella Muti as Princess Aura, and Max von Sydow as the evil Ming the Merciless, ruler of the planet Mongo. The plot of Flash Gordon is pretty basic. Ming the Merciless has his sights set on conquest, and his next target is the planet Earth. The slightly mad Dr. Hans Zarkov is aware of the coming danger, and he basically kidnaps both Flash Gordon and Dale Arden and sets off on a rocket ship to Mongo to try to stop the invasion himself. The tone of Flash Gordon shifts from campy to serious throughout the film, but its colorful visuals, memorable soundtrack, and some great performances, especially from Blessed, Dalton, and von Sydow, have made Flash Gordon a cult classic. Flash Gordon was a success at the American box office, and a sequel was planned, but it never happened. Sometime during post-production, Sam J. Jones had a falling out with producer De Laurentiis. This resulted in Flash's voice being dubbed over by another actor in certain parts of the film. Since Jones had left, plans for a sequel were scrapped. There is a great documentary from 2017 called Life After Flash, which recounts the making of the film and details the life of Sam J. Jones since his falling out with De Laurentiis. and how that affected both his life and his career. This documentary is available on some streaming platforms and is a very good watch if you're a fan of the film. And at the time of its release, there were no toys created to tie in with the Flash Gordon film. But in the decades since, many different figures have been created by companies like Biff Bang Pow and NECA. The second Flash Gordon project to come about after Star Wars was Filmation's The New Adventures of Flash Gordon, a Saturday morning cartoon series that ran from 1979 to 1982, which was then followed up by an animated film, Flash Gordon, The Greatest Adventure of All. I've already done a full video on the Filmation Flash Gordon project, where I go over the creation of the series, the subsequent film, and the toy line from Mattel. So I won't repeat all that information here. If you want the details of that, I will leave the link to that video in the description of this one. What I will say about that is that, in my opinion, the first season of the Flash Gordon animated series done by Filmation, which was a continuous 16-episode serial, is the best thing that Filmation ever produced, and is the most faithful adaptation of the original Alex Raymond comic strip, due to Filmation producer Lou Scheimer being a huge fan of the character. Since the 1970s, Flash Gordon has enjoyed much greater popularity in pop culture than his rival Buck Rogers. In the 1980s, Flash and other King Feature Syndicate comic strip characters united for the television cartoon and toy line Defenders of the Earth. In 1996, Flash Dale and his supporting cast were reimagined as teenagers for an animated television series and toy line. And in 2007, Flash was reimagined once again for a live-action series on the Sci-Fi channel. Star Trek certainly owes nothing to Star Wars, and the canceled series from the 1960s was well on its way to returning in the 1970s, thanks to the popularity of the original series in syndication and brisk toy and merchandise sales. But Star Wars would have an effect on how Star Trek would return. For a while, Paramount was waffling between bringing Star Trek back as a movie or a television series, finally deciding to bring it back on TV in a series called Star Trek Phase 2, to be led by original series creator Gene Roddenberry. But after the huge box office success of Star Wars, Paramount changed its mind again and decided to bring Star Trek back in movie theaters. Star Trek the Motion Picture was released on December 7th, 1979. The film reunited all the original cast members from the 1960s television series: William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, James Doohan, George Takei, Nichelle Nichols, Walter Koenig, Majel Barrett, and Grace Lee Whitney. Two new characters were introduced: Willard Decker, played by Stephen Collins, and Ilya, played by Persis Kambata. The script was a reworked version of the pilot of the proposed Phase 2 television series. Paramount gave the film a huge marketing push, which included numerous tie-ins, as well as an action figure line from Mego. Mego chose to make the Star Trek the Motion Picture toy line in the same image as Kenner's Star Wars toys, 3 3/4-inch figures with 5 points of articulation. Star Trek the Motion Picture was a very troubled production behind the scenes, a topic that is much too big to tackle in this video, but there are other YouTube channels who have done extensive videos on the subject. Nevertheless, Star Trek the Motion Picture was a box office success, but not to the level that Paramount wanted based on its marketing campaign. A sequel with a much lower budget was greenlit, and Paramount wrested creative control away from series creator Gene Roddenberry, as they were not happy with the motion picture's story direction and what is perceived to be the biggest complaint about the film: the very slow pace. The sequel, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, was released on June 4th, 1982, and is widely considered to be the best Star Trek film that features the original series cast. Gene Roddenberry was finally able to bring Star Trek back to television in 1987 with the debut of Star Trek: The Next Generation. And since its return in 1979, Star Trek has been a staple of pop culture. Since the 1960s, there have been 11 Star Trek television series, with a 12th on the way, and 13 feature films, as well as thousands of collectibles, toys, and action figures. Although many people try to create a rivalry between Star Wars and Star Trek, I think the two properties are obviously vastly different, and over the years I have enjoyed both of them equally. By the 1970s, adapting Japanese anime for the American market was nothing new, as several different anime shows had made their way across the Pacific in the 1960s. But in the wake of Star Wars, two American anime adaptations, say that 3 times fast, caught the attention of many young viewers, including me. The first we'll talk about is Battle of the Planets, which was originally a series called Science Ninja Team Gatchaman. In Gatchaman, a team of 5 young superpowered ninja in bird-themed uniforms defended planet Earth against the evil international terrorist organization called Galactor, who were intent on controlling Earth's natural resources. Gatchaman came to the attention of TV producer Sandy Frank in early 1977, and after the success of Star Wars, Frank committed to a Western release of the show, although it was significantly altered for US broadcast. The series was rewritten to transform it into an intergalactic adventure rather than an Earth-based one. Galactor became the forces of the evil planet Spectre, who would attack Earth's various colonies throughout the galaxy. Of course, all these various colonies looked like places on Earth, so they really weren't fooling anyone. Anyway, the cast of Gatchaman became G-Force. Mark, Jason, Princess, Tiny, and Keop, 5 young people with superpowers who operated out of the underwater base Center Neptune, led by Chief Anderson, with the forces of planet Spectre being led by the enigmatic Zoltar, who reported to his leader, the mysterious Luminous One. Spectre would employ a variety of giant robots to invade and attack Earth and its various colonies. Of the 105 episodes of Science Ninja Team Gatchaman, 85 were adapted for Battle of the Planets, albeit very heavily edited. As the original series featured some graphic violence and some death, all of that had to be taken out for American broadcast. To fill in the running time and to easily fill in the blanks of the story, very cheaply made new animation was created, featuring the robotic character 7-Zark-7, a sort of combination between R2-D2 and C-3PO. 7-Zark-7 would send the G-Force team off on its missions and provide narration and needed exposition to fill in the blanks of the stories. Battle of the Planets featured a great American voice cast, including Casey Kasem, Ronnie Shell, Janet Waldo, Alan Young, and Key Luke as the villainous Zoltar. For me, seeing Battle of the Planets for the first time was a bit of a revelation. Having grown up in the 70s, most of the cartoons I watched were by Hanna-Barbera and similar studios. American animation at that time was made very cheaply, very quickly. It was very stiff and flat. And a lot of the Saturday morning cartoons were comedic in nature. Even in its heavily edited form, the dynamic animation of Battle of the Planets was much more exciting than anything I had watched in years. Unfortunately, at the time of its release, there were no toys available for Battle of the Planets. There were a few rack toys here and there, but no action figures, spaceships, or monsters. Even today, finding action figures based on the Battle of the Planets characters is very difficult, and those releases are few and far between, with one of the latest being an action figure of Ken the Eagle, aka Mark, from Storm Collectibles. The anime series Space Battleship Yamato debuted in Japan in 1974. A film version of the series was created in 1977, which saw limited release in the US as a film titled Space Cruiser, which eventually aired on television in the Los Angeles area in 1978. Following this, the Westchester Corporation identified Space Battleship Yamato as a potential quote-unquote kids property and purchased the rights to the first 2 seasons of the series. Dubbing and editing were done by Griffin Bacall Advertising, and production and syndication were handled by Cluster Television. If you're a fan of the original Transformers or G.I. Joe cartoons, you'll recognize the names of those 2 companies, as they had both worked with Marvel Productions to produce those shows. Space battleship Yamato was retitled Star Blazers and made its American syndicated debut in 1979. Star Blazers saw much less editing than the previously discussed Battle of the Planets. Some of the more graphic violence was taken out of the show, and the original Japanese names of the characters were not only Americanized but given a certain Star Wars-esque flavor. For example, the characters Kodai, Shima, and Yuki were renamed Wildstar, Venture, and Nova. In the anime, the ship, the Yamato, was resurrected and rebuilt from the Japanese World War II era battleship of the same name. In the American version, this is mentioned at the beginning of the story, but the ship is rechristened the Argo, named after the ship from the Greek myth of Jason and the Argonauts. The story of Star Blazers is the same as space battleship Yamato. In the year 2199, the Earth comes under attack by an alien planet called Gamelon, known as Gamelus in the original anime. Gamelon bombards the Earth with planet bombs that render the surface of the Earth an unlivable radioactive wasteland. Mankind retreats to underground cities in an attempt to survive, as Earth's battle fleet engages and is defeated by the Gamelons in an outer space battle. Hope for Earth's survival comes in the form of a message from the distant planet Iskandar and its ruler, Queen Starsha. Starsha promises a cure for the dying Earth in the form of the mysterious Cosmo DNA, but she cannot get the Cosmo DNA to Earth. For Earth to survive, they must travel to the distant planet, retrieve the Cosmo DNA, and return to Earth, all the while trying to evade or outfight their alien foes. The one catch is that they only have 1 year in which to complete their mission. After that, the radiation poisoning will have seeped its way underground, and all life on Earth will cease to exist. Star Blazers was unique among American cartoons at the time, as it was a serialized story, not episodic, which made it appointment viewing for me after school every weekday afternoon. It was also a much more serious and dramatic cartoon, as had ever been seen on American television before. I was engrossed by the series due to its beautiful animation and its great storytelling. The fact that they only had 1 year to complete their mission was reinforced at the end of every episode, where the narrator would let you know how many days were left before all life on Earth became extinct. Unfortunately, like Battle of the Planets, there were no toys available of Star Blazers at that time. Although over the years, many versions of the Yamato and various other ships from the series have been made available in everything from plastic model kits to high-end die-cast metal replicas. After the success of Battle of the Planets and Star Blazers, even more anime adaptations began popping up on US television in the 1980s, most notably Robotech and Voltron, although those were both greatly edited and reworked from the Japanese originals. But with the advent of the VHS era, American viewers could start viewing anime in its original form in both subtitled and English dubbed versions. First being marketed in the US as Japanimation, Japanese anime quickly became a staple in American pop culture as well, with the popularity of franchises like Gundam, Dragon Ball, and Pokemon rivaling that of anything produced in the US. For me, even in their edited forms, Battle of the Planets and Star Blazers will remain two of my favorite television cartoons of all time. Of course, we can't talk about the influence of Star Wars in the late 1970s without talking about toys. And even though I have discussed all the toy lines related to all the movie and TV properties that came out, there were many other space and sci-fi based toys, not based on anything, that were cranked out by companies during that time. A lot of them did take more than a little inspiration from Star Wars, and sometimes they got into some legal trouble because of that. Here are 3 toy lines in particular that I had during that time. The first is the Galaxy Laser Team, aka Space Patrol, from Timmy Toys. A set of plastic Army Men style figures that combine the aesthetic of both classic Flash Gordon and Star Wars. I won't go into great detail about the Galaxy Laser team in this video because I've already done that in an entire video dedicated to the history of Galaxy Laser team. So if you want to know more, definitely check that out. Link will be in the description. In 1977, toymaker Tomland released a 1/18 scale line of figures called Staroid Raiders, which were subsequently re-released under many different names, including Space Raiders, Space Fighter, and Space People. As we know, at the release of Star Wars in '77, even though Kenner had the license to make toys for the film, the toys were not ready. So they had to do their famous mail-away campaign. That prompted other toy makers to rush out some cheap knockoff figures to fill the void and cash in on the hunger for space toys at that time. The Tomland Star Raiders were a group of strange space aliens, with names like Dado, Koga, Tanko, Yasu, and Zor. Many of the figures shared the same body buck, with the differences being the heads, arms, and weapons. Even though they were cheaply made, the Staroid Raiders had some pretty imaginative designs and featured some very weird aliens. And many of them had laser swords as part of their armaments to cash in on Star Wars lightsabers. There were also a couple of space robots released for the line, which had spring-loaded missiles. I had about a dozen of the Staroid Raiders toys. They were very easy to come by and very cheap. And much like I did with toys from other toy lines like Battlestar Galactica and Flash Gordon, once I had my Star Wars Cantina playsets, the Staroid Raiders would become strange alien characters to fill up those playsets. Even though at the time of their release the Staroid Raiders were just cheap knockoffs, today loose complete examples can command some pretty significant prices on the secondary market. The final toy line I'll talk about is Star Team from the Ideal Toy Company. Ideal, who had been around since the early 1900s, was no stranger to making action figures or space toys. In 1977, Ideal decided to cash in on the Star Wars popularity by releasing the Star Team. The toy line consisted of 3 figures: the 12-inch tall Knight of Darkness, the silver robot with the strangely green head Zem-21, and the smaller Zeroid, a robot with a dome-shaped head. Zeroid also had a flying saucer-type spaceship called the Starhawk. And the Star Team also got a tie-in comic book produced by Marvel. Now, looking at these characters, you'd think they were an obvious knockoff of Star Wars, which is what George Lucas thought when he sued Ideal Toys for the creation of Star Team. But George lost that case. Why? Because Ideal had configured the Star Team from concepts and toys that they had already owned. The Vader-like Knight of Darkness was created using the body of Ideal's 1960s action figure Captain Action. Zem-21 was retooled from the action figure J.J. Arms. And Zeroid was a slightly remolded version of a 1960s robot that came out in an entire line called Zeroids, with a previous version of the Starhawk flying saucer being released in the Zeroids line. That ship was called Zem-21, the same name they used for the silver robot. Even the name Star Team had already been used by Ideal in a series of 1960s-era space roleplay toys. Even though the retooling and reconfiguring of the toys was an obvious attempt to cash in on Star Wars, since everything Ideal was using predated the film, Lucas' case against them was dropped. Of course, when Kenner's actual Star Wars toys were released, they took the toy industry by storm. And since there were no way Ideal's figures could interact with the Kenner Star Wars line due to their huge difference in scale, Star Team only lasted until 1979. That's it for this one, and I hope you enjoyed that look back at the explosion of science fiction in the wake of the original Star Wars in the late 1970s. And even with the criticism in recent years, Star Wars continues to be one of the top entertainment brands on the planet. And although every Star Wars project and every era does have its critics, if you enjoy a particular film or a particular era, then by all means, go ahead and enjoy it. Nobody can take that away from you. We are never all going to like the same things. So try not to let other people's opinions affect how you love something. Just enjoy it. As always, thanks for watching, thank you for your time and attention, and I will see you in the next video.